Welcome everybody to lecture 5. This time we'll talk about an experimental effort in the late 19th century which created revolution related to our notion on the velocity of light in vacuum. As we have seen already, c, the velocity of light in vacuum, a free space, enters into Maxwell's equations and also into the Lorentz transformation equations we have defined earlier as sort of a universal constant. Naturally, it is intriguing because it should be frame dependent. Now, till the late 19th century, people thought that there does exist an absolute medium called ether, something very mysterious, hypothetical, and almost heavenly, which pervades everything, including vacuum. And electromagnetic waves or light are disturbance propagating in ether. Therefore, C was looked upon as measured with respect to an ether medium, neutral, absolute, distant ether medium. Now, if that is so, then for a moment consider the surface of the earth to be an inertial frame, neglecting the small acceleration due to rotational motion. Now, when the earth is rotating, it certainly means this frame, an experimental setup based on the earth, is having a motion west to east. So the optical experiments designed in such a setup, in principle, should see the ether medium dragging back east to west with respect to it, and therefore the velocity of light will be altered, being the relative velocity with respect to the moving terrestrial frame. One such attempt to measure the alteration of C on a terrestrial frame was the so-called Michelson-Morley experiment. The date given in the notes is a little wrong. It is off by about a decade, but the time indicated was the one where people were very excited about the wrong results, or rather puzzling results of the Michelson-Morley experiments. Now, follow page 23 onwards for this. Standard textbooks also describe the experimental setup and the discussion and analysis of the experiment. I particularly refer you to the discussion on Michelson-Morley experiment in the book by A.P. French, which I have already mentioned to you. Here, basically, we have two arms, each of length L, for light to travel when light comes from a source A. At point B, there is a semi-silvered mirror which reflects light, at least half of the light, in a perpendicular direction to hit another mirror at C and come back through B, pass down and enter into a spectrometer, while the other half of the amplitude gets transmitted all the way to the point E, get reflected back and again back at B to enter into the spectrometer. Now, normally, the paths traveled are equal. All the errors were taken care of very carefully. So therefore, this being effectively interference of coherent light, at least in the middle of the spectrometer, you would expect to see a maximum, interference maximum. Now, there will be variation of path due to slightly different directions taken by parts of the wave train, and those who will create small differences and lead to an interference pattern. If the earth were static, BCB and BEB would amount to the same distance, but it is moving. Let us discuss what is seen from an ethereal frame who sees the terrestrial frame as moving. So now you follow equation 61 onwards. It is very clearly written. The time taken along B to E is T1 and E back to B is T2 because the setup is moving from west to east, that is to say from left to right according to the diagram on top of equation 24. T1 and T2 will be different, and how different is a matter of calculation, which is used in equation 62, and the total time taken by light, BEB, is given in equation 63. For BCB, the apparently perpendicular direction is seen from an external observer as a motion from B to a point C prime, where C moves to a point C prime because of the Earth's motion. And from C prime, it comes back and meets you at B prime again, where the point, rather the plate B has moved in the meantime. So basically, light follows a different path, and the time taken is also calculated in a straightforward way using very elementary geometry. Thus, basically, the time taken along the two paths are calculable exactly from an outsider's frame, and the time difference is also calculated, T1 plus T2 for the BEB part and T3 for BCB part, which is actually BC prime B prime from an external observer's angle. And because of this time difference, the phase shift that is created is also straightforwardly calculable. Now, even in the late 19th century, spectroscopy was incredibly well developed. This was largely chemist's job, to a large extent physicist's job, and it led to great advancement not only in astronomy then itself, but also in developments such as the advent of quantum mechanics. Spectra of atoms were closely studied. In this context, this highly developed spectroscopy was used to see the interference pattern and the shift from this of the maximum from the central position because of this phase shift described in equation 68. This calculation is absolutely straightforward. If the time difference is calculated, twice pi times c times that time difference over lambda is the phase shift, because the path difference is c times the time difference. So you expect the central part of the spectrometer not to show a maximum because of equal paths, but because of motion of the frame attached to the Earth with respect to ether, as it will lead to time difference, and so it will not be a zero path difference point. So you expect the maximum to shift according to the formula given in 68. The distance used was about 11 meters in the experiment. Now, one expected this phase shift, but the result was that they did not see any phase shift. And this was after taking very carefully into account all possible errors. In fact, people did exchange the two parts, BE and BC, so that the direction along the speed of light, and the direction along the direction of motion of the Earth, and the direction perpendicular to the motion of the Earth, they were exchanged by turning the apparatus by 90 degrees so that any systematic error due to length measurement could be cancelled out. But again, no phase shift. Now that you expect a phase shift is described the way it is written in my notes with respect to the neutral observer station with respect to the station across the station at ether and observing the terrestrial frame as moving. The same can be seen or derived by going to the frame of the Earth itself. For that, I will refer you to the discussion in page 54 of A.P. French's book, In the Middle of Michelson-Morley Experiments, where it is discussed in the frame of the experimental setup itself, that is to say the frame of the Earth. From that frame, you see the ether moving from east to west in principle. So velocity of light on the ethereal frame should be altered again by the velocity of light formula, and the times will be slightly different from what it is for a static frame. And because the light velocity is not c anymore, it is c minus v or something like that. In the same way, in the perpendicular direction, the velocity of light will be a vector sum of the actual velocity in the perpendicular direction in that frame and the ethereal drag. So therefore, the resultant will be a kind of direction described by the parallelogram law, again leading to the same B, C prime, B prime type thing, as it is explained very clearly in this part of A.P. French starting from page 54. I think having studied mechanics very well at your 11th and 12th standards, you were immediately able to see that an observer fixed to the frame, normally had there been modification due to the ethereal drag, one would have seen the velocity along the perpendicular direction BC compounded with minus the velocity of the terrestrial frame, that is to say an inverse direction, as the net direction of the velocity of light. As a result, the vertical component or north-south-north component of that velocity would have really mattered. And that is again given by the Pythagoras theorem, leading to the formulas we have derived. So it is calculated as the expected phase shift in my notes from the ethereal frame, and in A.P. French's book as from the terrestrial frame. Doesn't matter. In fact, in that book, the lengths are also taken to be different, L1 and L2 in the general case. But be it as it may, from both frames, it was estimated, expected, and envisioned that one would see a phase shift. The maximum will shift from the central direction. But from both frame point of view, it was a big surprise that in spite of taking care of all corrections due to errors and so on, there was no shift. So there is an inescapable conclusion. The speed of light in free space is a constant, and that is c, nothing different from c, in all inertial frames which are moving with respect to each other. Here, to a close approximation, the terrestrial frame is an inertial frame with respect to the ethereal plane. So this is very strange. The two persons moving with respect to each other will still see light as moving with speed c. In order for that to happen, if you think a little carefully, the time flow has to be different from each other in the two frames. So we are back to the questionable assumption in Galilean transformation, where time flow is assumed to be same in two inertial frames. We are painfully pushed towards the conclusion that that assumption was wrong. Time flow is actually changing. And this is what had been already incorporated in the prescriptions of Lorentz transformation. Having seen such a strange situation, one had no option but to stick to Lorentz transformations, which could also explain Michelson-Morley experiment in a way we will describe in the near future, or ask you to explain it. But In the meantime, in 1905, a young gentleman of age 26 who had a degree in physics but who was working as a patent office clerk in Bern, Switzerland. Having got a degree, he was jobless. He had not got any university job and any teaching job for nearly 2 years, but finally became a lower division clerk in the patent office. His name was Albert Einstein. He continued his studies in physics, and in the year 1905 wrote several revolutionary papers in somewhat different subjects, starting from Brownian motion to photoelectric effect explanation to what is called the basic paper of special theory of relativity. There, his avowed approach was based on not explaining Michelson-Morley experiment. I am unable to comment whether he genuinely did not know about it or not, but he tried to keep the laws of physics invariant in all frames, and that included Maxwell's electrodynamics. So he tried to formulate his laws in such a way that Maxwell's equations would be invariant in all inertial frames. In order for that to happen, of course, he would have to have C constant because they would enter into Maxwell's equation. And that belief or should I say compulsion, was kind of strongly now supported by the negative outcome of Michelson-Morley experiment. This was one of the most celebrated negative experimental results in the history of science. So Einstein generalized following works not only of Michelson and Morley, but also of Lorentz, Poincaré, Minkowski, a number of celebrated physicists of the time, who in bits and pieces guessed the underlying concepts, but Einstein gave a single framework in which one could explain everything. And that included two basic postulates of the special theory of relativity. The first is the laws of physics look the same in all inertial frames. And second postulate is the speed of light in vacuum is the same in all inertial frames. Now, in order for these postulates to be valid, one has to completely convince oneself that the Lorentz transformation prescriptions are not just some ad hoc prescriptions, but some consequence of these two postulates. So Galilean transformation, of course, does not work, as we have seen from the negative outcome of Michelson-Morley experiment and also the apparent irreconcilability of Maxwell's equations with Galilean transformations. So in the next lecture, we will see how Lorentz transformation equations can be derived or kind of obtained is a better word, in a way consistent with the approach of special relativity or consistent with the basic postulates of special relativity. We will do it not in the most conventional way done in textbooks. You can find that in AP French, Resnick, and all other books. There's conventional way, trying to keep light moving with the same speed with respect to two inertial frames gives you Lorentz transformations. But we will do it in a slightly different way, which will be the subject of lecture 6. So we kind of postpone our curiosity till that point. Thank you very much.